This morning.
Thank you, guys. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to all of you present here today and to those who are joining us online. And thank you to everyone who has made this service possible. And thank you to Gaz for inviting me to share some thoughts about Palm Sunday. And a special thank you to Edward for his lovely reading. I think we should start with a prayer. So hands together and eyes closed. Dear Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. So as we gather today, we recall a very familiar Bible story, the story of Palm Sunday. Jesus enters the city of Jerusalem on a donkey. We hear the story every year as we approach the holy feast of Easter. We already know that this is the beginning of a significant series of events. It is the pivotal moment marking the start of Holy Week and the end of Jesus' earthly ministry, because Jesus came not to establish an earthly ministry, but a spiritual one. The story of Palm Sunday is recorded in all four Gospels, and we heard it this morning read by Edward. These are the events leading up to Jesus experiencing some very painful moments with his disciples before his humiliating trial and his great suffering on the cross before his resurrection and the saving of mankind from their sin. Looking back at the passage, we see Jesus travelling towards Jerusalem with some of his disciples, and he sends two of his disciples on ahead to find a donkey, or colt, a foal of a donkey, and they are at that moment near Bethany, by the side of the Mount of Olives. This donkey is tied up in a village, and he tells the disciples what to say if they are challenged. And indeed, they are. And they said, "The Master requires it." They brought it back to Jesus, and after cloaks had been placed on its back, Jesus continued his journey and proceeded towards Jerusalem. Now, when we look at the same story in Matthew's Gospel, it adds a couple of things. It tells us that by riding a donkey, Jesus was being humble. It also tells us that the crowds cut palm leaves and laid them in the road, hence our palm crosses. And it is described as a triumphant entry. Now, I thought about this very carefully, and when I imagined what a triumphant entry might look like, I came up with two things. I don't know if you remember the 1964 film, The Fall of the Roman Empire, but in that, the emperor rode on a magnificent white stallion as he rode into a captured city with a look of triumph on his face. And the other was a black and white newsreel. It was of the German invasion of Paris in 1940, where the troops and Hitler were looking gleeful as they stood beneath the Eiffel Tower. But in contrast, Jesus is seen approaching the city on a donkey. Now, donkeys are often mentioned in the Bible. There's a donkey mentioned in Luke in the story of the Good Samaritan. As I've said, a donkey is mentioned in each of the 4 Gospels, as well as in the book of Zechariah and in the book of Numbers. And in fact, it mentions 30,500 in the book of Numbers, and one in particular was the donkey belonging to Balaam. And this is a donkey that speaks. In this story, the donkey is guided by God to change course to prevent Balaam from his intended curse on Israel. Balaam hits the donkey 3 times, and then God allows the donkey to actually speak to Balaam and ask him why he's hurting him. This leads Balaam to meet an angel and see the error of his ways. And if you want to see a painting of that story, it was painted by Rembrandt in 1626 and is on display in the Musée Cognac-Jay in Paris. There is also an apocryphal story about a donkey, which inspires us to shrug off the difficulties of life in order that we can succeed. A hard-working beast of burden, just like the one Jesus is riding into Jerusalem, falls into a deep pit on a farm. And unable to clamber out, he calls out pitifully, and the farmer tries all he can to reach him, but he is unable to help. So to put him out of his misery, the only thing the farmer thinks to do is to bury the poor donkey where he is. So loads of soil are dropped down upon the donkey, 1 shovel at a time. But this humble donkey, just like the one Jesus is riding, is a survivor. And each shovelful that lands on his back is shaken off and then trodden on, so that gradually the floor level begins to rise. And with each shake of the soil and each step the donkey takes, he rises to the top of the pit and steps out safe and sound. And we are urged to do the same with every shovelful of difficulty that lands on our backs. Shake it off as best you can and use it to rise from your pit. Now, returning to our reading, we see Jesus accompanied by his bewildered and anxious disciples making their way through the crowds into the city. So was it a triumphant entry in a worldly sense? Well, it was certainly dramatic. Jesus on a donkey, crowds following and cheering, some who had travelled with him, others who had met him at the city gates. But they were a fickle group. They soon changed from receiving him with joy to rejecting him. But the symbol of the donkey and its humble appearance was the image that Jesus wanted to show and that we remember each year. And this whole scene was predicted in the book of Zechariah that I mentioned earlier. It's found in chapter 9, verses 9 to 11. And it says the following: "Rejoice, rejoice, people of Zion. Shout for joy, you people of Jerusalem. Look, your king is coming to you. He comes triumphant and victorious, but humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And so Jesus arrives, and the scene is set for all the events of Holy Week. But what can we take from this tale? We know that many who welcome Jesus would soon turn on him. So we must remember that we too can be fickle. But our heart towards Jesus will not affect his heart towards us. You see, Jesus is always in control. He is motivated by love, and he is always worthy of our praise. So, people of St. James the Great, as it says in Zechariah, rejoice, rejoice. Your King is coming. Happy Palm Sunday. Amen.